Hey everybody, this is World of Tanks with Hachiman. Today I'm going to start doing something that I've promised that I was going to do for quite some time, and that is just a general garage overview of the tanks in the game. I've done a few of these, obviously. I've done reviews on the EZ8 and the Jumbo, the Pershing, the Super Pershing, a number of tanks, but I've been asked for these types of garage overviews on basically every tank in the game, which of course is quite an undertaking. But I'm going to start with the American heavy tanks, and I'm going to start with the T1 Heavy. Why am I going to start with the Americans and the heavy tanks? Well, because I have every American tank, so it makes it a lot easier to start there. First heavy tank in the American tree is the T1 Heavy tank. This tank is historically, there were some prototypes. It was part of the American Heavy Tank program that was started in 1941, basically as soon as the M4 Shermans were coming off the production lines. Even before, the Americans were already looking for heavy tank options because they knew that the Germans were going to be fielding bigger and badder tanks very, very soon. So what the United States Army asked for was a mobile, an agile tank with a lot of armor and the best firepower available. Well, of course, if you're a tank engineer, you might as well say, okay, can you pick two of those three? Because they don't tend to go together. But what we got was actually something pretty close, all things considered, considering the day. T1 Heavy Tank never was accepted into service, never really went into production, just prototypes and trials. It has the old school rounded lower plate, which you know that the higher tier American tanks have more of the beak style. This can be a bit of a weak point. Your hull armor frontally is 83 millimeters, 44 on the side, 41 on the rear. Do not get flanked in this tank. One thing you'll see about it is that it is very, very tall. So if you are flanked, they have a huge target to shoot at, and any shot they fire is going in. Turret is a lot better. 102 millimeters frontally, 83 on the side, 83 on the rear. Now the rear turret and side turret are very flat. So again, even though it's 83 millimeters, you really don't want to get shot here. However, the frontal turret at 102 is very thick, plus you see the size of this gun mantlet. Not a lot of shots are going to pen that. Frontally speaking, 83 millimeters doesn't seem horribly impressive. Churchill 3 in Soviets has 176. The Churchill 1 has, or the KV-1 has 75. But you'd be surprised that 8 millimeters can make a difference. Also, it's slightly angled backwards. It's got more slope right here than it does here. You've got a slight angling backwards. The way you make this armor work for you is with angles. The T1 Heavy Tank was the first tank I ever received steel wall in. And if you can angle your tank to about right here, almost anything fired at the front of the tank is going to bounce by a Tier 5 tank, mind you. Excluding derp guns, of course, which will always get some damage. But you can't afford to angle it more than this, because if you angle it this far, you've exposed the side of your tank way too much. And at this angle right here, that 44 millimeters of side hull armor is equivalent to well over 100. At that angle, it's more like 80. And most of your Tier 5 tank guns are going to pen that without thinking about it too hard. As far as mobility and agility, like I said, the American military wanted not only armor, but they wanted mobile. Well, it's not bad. For a 59-ton machine, you've got 35.4 top speed kph, and the tank will achieve that regularly. Its traverse speed is 25, which is not terrible for something this big. And it gets up to speed reasonably well. Even though, and we keep going back to the KV-1, we'll talk about that more in a second. even though the KV-1 is rated with 34 top speed, we all know the KV-1 takes a while to get up to that. Plus, with that 20 degree per second traverse as opposed to the T1's 25, the KV-1, when it has to turn, feels like a dog. The T1 Heavy does not. So it is more agile. They wanted the best weaponry available. Well, at the time, that was the M1A1 3-inch gun. Okay, actually, the original prototypes of the T1 Heavy didn't have that gun. They were first armed with the same weapon, basically, as found on the M3 Lee and Grant. This is arguably not as good a weapon as the 85mm on the KV-1. Its penetration's 128mm and 115 average damage. 128mm is more than adequate. Simply put, you should have no trouble penning anything you need to shoot at with this tank unless you get into a Tier 7 game and you're shooting at the front of a T-29. Well, if you're doing that, you're doing something wrong anyway. 115 average damage, but what makes this gun what it is the rate of fire. As you can see, I have a 100% loader, a tank gun rammer, and vents, and I'm getting a 3.04 actual gun reload time. So based on an average damage of 115, this is roughly 2200 damage per minute with this gun. That's very good. For a Tier 5 heavy tank, that is excellent. So you have to play this almost like you do the American mediums or the T67. Once you get into position to lay down the fire, you've got to sling as much lead as you possibly can. The gun does not have the best accuracy at 0.43 dispersion at 100 meters, but the aim time at 2.3 is very, very good. It aims faster than it reloads, unlike, say, some of the 6-pounders in the British line. I do have a gun laying drive on this guy. It was mainly more than anything because I couldn't put anything else. This tank won't tank a stabilizer. It does not get ammo racked easily, and even if it did, its reload time is so fast you don't really feel it. So there wasn't much need. What you have to look out for in this tank is this high profile on the side. The Cromwell is almost half this height. The top of the Cromwell's turret comes to here on this tank. So you really have to be careful of that and keeping your enemies in front of you, but at an angle at all times. Briefly, in the last closing minutes of this, everyone says the KV-1 is by far the best Tier 5 tank in the game. Certainly the best Tier 5 heavy tank. And generally, I agree with that statement. It definitely has superior overall firepower, alpha, and penetration. But not better DPM, sir. Not better DPM because of the rate of fire on this gun. Additionally, the KV-1's armor is tough all around and is pretty troll. However, it'll never block the incoming fire that a well-angled T1 Heavy can. So the people that say the KV-1 is far, far better than the T1 Heavy, they simply do not understand the way the T1 Heavy is meant. They do not understand the way the T1 Heavy is meant to be played. Simply put, it's been one of my favorite tanks for a long time, even though I don't play it as much anymore because of high-tier games and strongholds and everything else, but once in a while I have a lot of fun to come back to this guy. And if I get around to it, I've got a great video of my T1 Heavy side-scraping at Heavy Alley on Himmelsdorf against Tier 7 tanks and watching shots bounce off. And I'm talking about a T29, a Tiger. So if I can get around to it, I'll get that video up to go along. But anyway, thanks for watching this. Thumbs up the video, subscribe. The next one coming up will be the M6 heavy tank. Thanks a lot, guys.